Wait at a railroad crossing sometime and count the cars sliding past, and you've likely spotted something strange. Down in the middle of the train, wedged among loaded coal hoppers or tank cars, rides a full-size diesel locomotive, cab empty of any crew, nothing trailing behind it the way a second train would. That engine isn't stray, though, nor being ferried off to some other yard. So why would a railroad set a locomotive smack in the middle of a freight train rather than up front where you'd expect it? The answer traces to a physics problem nearly every railroad on the planet had to crack, and to a technology hatched inside a little telephone factory out in rural Ohio that changed freight railroading for good. Moving a freight train the simplest way means stacking locomotives at the head end and pulling. For over a century, from the earliest steam runs over wooden-railed track up to the big diesel road units of the 1950s, that method held up fine. The early engines dragged trains of 50 or 60 cars across most terrain with little fuss. The lead engine pulled, the freight cars came behind, and the steel couplers linking them held the whole consist as one. Come the mid-20th century, though, America's railroads were after longer trains. Those longer trains meant fewer crews, fewer stops at terminals, and a lower operating cost for every ton of freight carried across the continent. The economics couldn't have been plainer. The physics refused to play along. With every bit of the pulling force coming from the front, each coupler from the lead locomotive to the very last car bears the piled-up weight of all that trails it. Across a short 30-car train, that load sits comfortably inside what the coupler was designed for. But on a train reaching beyond a mile, with 100 loaded coal hoppers laboring up a mountain grade, the drawbar force at the couplers closest to the locomotive can top what the steel hardware was ever meant to bear. That's when knuckles give way and trains split apart on the main line. Coupler stress was only the start. As a long, heavy freight train swung around a curve at full throttle, all that pulling force fought to yank the train straight, much as drawing a chain tight across a table hauls the middle links toward the direct line. Railroaders gave this a name: string lining. On mountain subdivisions laced with tight curves and hauling heavy tonnage, it could yank the inner wheels of the lighter cars clean off the inside rail. One instant, the train is curving through a river valley. The next, empty gondolas are rolling down the embankment. Braking, though, may have been the deadliest problem of all. Freight trains lean on air brakes, a system George Westinghouse dreamed up in 1868. It works by pushing air pressure changes along an unbroken brake pipe that runs the train's full length. The engineer up front in the locomotive works it all. On a short 40-car train, the brakes answer almost at once. But on a train of 150 cars, stretching close to 2 miles, a brake command can need a whole minute, sometimes nearer 2 minutes, to travel all the way back to the final car. And what does that look like in practice? Up front, the train is already easing off while the tail end keeps charging ahead at full speed. The cars caught between concertina together like an accordion, generating huge compressive forces that can shove them off the rail on curves or wrench coupler knuckles clean apart. Slack action, railroaders call it, and it has caused derailments, wrecked equipment, and spilled loads for as long as there have been trains. Freezing weather only deepened the misery. The rubber hose links between cars leaked all the more readily in the cold, and up front, the locomotive's air compressors fought to hold decent pressure across a brake pipe threading through 150 leaky joints. A train that stopped dependably in September could turn alarmingly slow by January. So how did railroads wrestle with all this before modern technology arrived? For decades, on the mountain subdivisions, they met these problems with the one tool they had. At the foot of steep grades, they parked extra locomotives, manned by their own engineers and firemen, set to hook onto the back of heavy freight trains and shove them over the mountain. Helper locomotives, these were called, and they were a mainstay of mountain railroading across the Rockies, the Sierra Nevada, and the Appalachians. If you've ever come across old photographs of steam-era helper districts, thick black smoke pouring from both ends of a coal train scrabbling up a 2% grade in the Blue Ridge Mountains, then you've seen what the work looked like. On the steepest grades of the Cascades and the Alleghenies, helper engines idled in sidings at the bottom of the climb. Boilers held hot day and night, poised to couple on and push the next loaded freight over the top. Yet the helper setup ran expensive, and the cost stacked up with every freight run across the mountain. Each helper district needed its own stable of locomotives, its own roster of crews, its own roundhouse or servicing shop, and its own dispatcher juggling the moves. Once the push was done, the helper crew had to get back down the mountain, either running light on the helper engine or thumbing a ride on a following freight. Delays piled up at the foot of every grade. Labor costs mounted with each shift change, and management knew a better answer had to be out there somewhere. What came next sprang from an unlikely place. In the early 1960s, a man by the name of D.W. Brosnan ran the Southern Railway from its headquarters in Washington, D.C. Brosnan wasn't the sort of railroad president to pass his days behind a mahogany desk. He'd hired on with the Southern in 1926 as a track-laying apprentice in the Georgia heat, then spent the next 4 decades climbing through every operating department the railroad owned. By the year he took the presidency, 1962, he'd built a name as a relentless modernizer, carrying, in one colleague's words, a curious blend of genius and ruthlessness. Brosnan was chewing on an idea that would remake freight railroading. Suppose you could command a locomotive sitting in the middle or the rear of a freight train by radio, with no crew riding along. From the front locomotive's cab, the lead engineer could work that remote engine, lining up throttle and brake commands along the whole train, as though every ounce of power sat in one spot. He reached out to the North Electric Company, a modest maker of telephones and electronics headquartered in Galion, Ohio. North Electric had cut its teeth on remote control gear for oil pipelines and electric utilities, drawing on a technology known as SCADA. Retooling that radio control know-how for a diesel locomotive rumbling through the Appalachian Mountains was a serious jump, but that was precisely the sort of jump Brosnan wanted. The system's first trial ran on the Southern Railway main line in 1963. To put it mildly, the early gear was bulky. Radio receivers and control electronics ran far too big to tuck inside an ordinary locomotive cab. So, North Electric loaded them into a separate ballasted boxcar that rode coupled to the remote engine. Standard multiple unit cables tied that boxcar to the locomotive, while its radio antenna kept it linked to the lead unit up at the head of the train. And it worked. The lead engineer could open up the remote diesel, bring in its dynamic brakes, and line up its air brake commands alongside the front consist. The whole thing carried on a radio signal ricocheting between antennas set half a mile apart. Come 1965, the earliest production systems had gone onto Southern Railway freight trains. In time, the technology picked up a trade name that would come to mean distributed power right across the world's railroad industry. They called it Locotrol. Here's the piece that tends to get missed about how distributed power made its way across the world's railroads. Its first adopters were no accident. They read like a lineup of the railroads moving the heaviest, most brutal freight anywhere on Earth. There was the Norfolk and Western, hauling its Appalachian coal drags. There was Canadian Pacific, grinding a path through the Canadian Rockies. And on the far side of the globe, the iron ore haulers of Australia's Queensland and Mount Newman, where trains already ran beyond 2 miles. Every one of them ran up against the same core physics problem, and every one saw the same solution in Brosnan's idea. Inside 2 decades of that first trial on the Southern, Locotrol was at work on 4 continents. If you're getting something out of this, think about subscribing. we dig into railroad engineering and history every week. As the decades rolled on, the electronics shrank in a big way. What had once demanded a whole box car in time slotted into a compact cabinet bolted right inside the locomotive cab. The radio systems grew shrewder, picking up fail-safe routines that threw the brakes on automatically the instant contact between lead and remote units dropped. Software took over much of the coordinating once done by hand, giving the engineer a digital screen with throttle position, brake status, and live telemetry from every remote unit. And what did all of it truly change for the trains threading mountain country and crossing the open plains? The payoff went well past raw pulling muscle. Spreading the locomotive power along the length of a freight train let railroads slash the peak drawbar stress on any one coupler by something close to half. Trains that would have ripped themselves to pieces with the power all bunched up front could now run safely, locomotives set at strategic points down the line. String-lining derailments on mountain curves fell off steeply, since the pulling force no longer sat concentrated at a single end of the consist. And jackknifing, the reverse hazard, where squeezed freight cars on a curve get driven off the high rail, grew far more manageable once braking forces were laid down evenly. Braking itself got better than nearly anything. With a remote engine sitting mid-train or at the rear and running an air compressor of its own, brake pipe pressure held steady the length of the consist, even in the harshest cold. And since the remote unit could set its brakes almost in step with the lead locomotive over the radio link, instead of waiting on the air pressure signal to inch along the brake pipe from car to car, the perilous slack action that had dogged long trains shrank to a sliver of what it used to be. Fuel use fell off noticeably as well. Field studies found that distributed power arrangements trimmed diesel burn by around 4 to 6% against the identical gross tonnage dragged wholly from the front. For a Class 1 railroad that gets through billions of gallons of diesel a year, those single-digit slivers work out to savings in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Easing the forces on a train also spelled less wear on locomotive wheels, on rail surfaces, and on coupler parts, lengthening the gaps between maintenance and shaving the long run bill for track infrastructure. But the true measure of what distributed power could pull off showed up neither in fuel receipts nor in maintenance logs. It showed up in raw tonnage and in track miles. On June 21, 2001, out in Western Australia's Pilbara region, BHP Iron Ore built a train measuring 7.353 kilometers end-to-end, about 4.5 miles from the lead locomotive's nose to the rear coupler on the final loaded ore wagon. That consists strung together 8 GEAC 6000 CW diesel-electric locomotives and 682 iron ore cars, set in a distributed layout scattered along the train's length. The payload came to about 82,000 metric tons of iron ore, and with the whole train's rolling stock counted in, the gross weight closed on 100,000 tons. This behemoth left the Yandi mine and rolled 275 kilometers to the southeast, reaching the port at Port Hedland, a trip of roughly 10 hours. Wherever it crossed a road along the way, it took 6 full minutes to grind past. That day, BHP claimed the Guinness World Record as the longest, heaviest freight train ever run on any railroad anywhere on Earth. Could 8 locomotives have managed that feat from the front? Not a chance. Behind 682 loaded ore wagons, the coupler forces would have burst past every structural limit built into the drawbar assembly before the train so much as cleared the first change of grade. Strung out along the train's length, though, those same 8 engines ran in coordinated radio harmony, each shouldering a share of the load, each holding brake pipe pressure across its own stretch, each obeying the lone engineer up in the lead cab, cars and cars ahead. These days, distributed power is nothing experimental. It is the norm across nearly every big freight railroad in North America. Daily, BNSF and Union Pacific send DPU-equipped trains out over the Powder River Basin coalfields, on through the Feather River Canyon, and across the Continental Divide, up where the thin air itself fights against diesel performance. Over routes running only 34 miles in the eastern United States, CSX has rolled out distributed power to push coal train capacity up by 30%. Around the globe, railroads in Brazil, China, India, and South Africa all run heavy haul on the same distributed power idea that got its start on the Southern Railway 6 decades back. Nor has the technology stood still. Modern engineer assist systems have carried it further yet. Wabtec's Trip Optimizer, along with New York Airbrake's Leader software, handles throttle, dynamic brake, and air brake work on its own, reading the gradient, the train's weight, and the lay of the terrain up ahead. These computerized systems marshal the distributed power units with a precision no lone human engineer could rival, squeezing the fuel burn and trimming in-train forces mile after mile in real time. A lone engineer riding the lead cab of a 2-mile coal train today commands the forces on every coupler, and that consist more fully than a whole crew of railroaders could 50 years ago. So what does the whole story add up to for the freight train grinding through your town? The trains just keep growing longer. Consists of 150 cars, and up are routine these days on the Western Class 1 railroads. The crews, meanwhile, haven't gotten any bigger. And that locomotive tucked into the heart of the consist, the one that looks to any untrained eye like a blunder, goes right on doing the quiet, unseen work that keeps the whole operation together. 60 years back, running a locomotive by radio from a mile off was an experiment on one lone railroad. It began as a notion from a Southern Railway president who had launched his career laying track under the Georgia sun, was put together by a telephone outfit in a small Ohio mill town, and trialed on an Appalachian main line in 1963. Today, upward of 20,000 locomotives around the world carry the distributed power gear that makes it all work. Yet who would ever have guessed that an idea sprung from pipeline remote control technology out in rural Ohio would wind up remaking how freight travels across 6 continents? What began as a way to sidestep hiring extra crews for the mountain helper districts has turned into the very backbone of modern freight railroading. The trains run longer, the coupler forces run lower, the brakes answer quicker, and the fuel bills come in smaller. All of it because somebody, back in the early 1960s, put a simple question on the table. What if the engine didn't have to sit at the front? Next time you're parked at a crossing and you catch a solitary diesel gliding along mid-train in a long string of freight, you'll understand just what it's up to. That engine is no misfit. It's the very thing that lets the rest of the train run as long as it does. Strip it out, and the couplers would give, the braking would lag, and the curves would claim their victims. The entire consist, everything else in it, is built around that one machine.